Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to have all of you here. My name is Andrea Botesato. I am an assistant professor and Enology extension specialist with Texas A&M, Texas AgriLife Extension Services. And this is part of my Enology webinar series. Today, we'll be talking about micro-oxygenation in winemaking. And before I introduce today's presenter, Dr. McCord, just a little bit of housekeeping. This presentation will take about 45 minutes. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the question box or the chat box, and we will be reading your questions at the end of the presentation, and we will answer them at that time. You know what's coming, my favor to ask from you all, please at the end of the webinar, if you can take 1 minute of your time to fill out the survey that's gonna pop up in your browser window there. It helps me continue this series. It's really important for me, so I really appreciate it if you take the time to fill out the survey. It helps a lot. If you have any issues with audio, if at any time you don't hear us, the easiest thing to do is log out and log back in again. That usually solves the problem. If not, just check your speaker and your system. All right, so today's presenter is Dr. Jeff McCord. Thank you so much for being here today. Dr. McCord has a long and strong connection to the wine industry. He grew up on a fruit farm in the southern shore of Lake Erie. His father and two other grape farmers started Pennsylvania's second winery, Penn Shore. He learned to disgorge champagne at the age of 14. Quite cool. And his grandfather was a mechanical engineer who designed grape crush and process systems for Taylor Wines, Seneca Foods, and Welch's. He was educated at Penn State. He got his Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Mechanization and Master of Science in Food Science. He then went to UC Davis, where he got his PhD in Agricultural and Environmental Chemistry. He worked for the University of Illinois as assistant professor of food chemistry. Then he moved on to Gallo Winery as senior research scientist and then chemistry program manager. And currently he is the director of research and technical sales for Stavin Inc. Dr. McCord, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your time and all the information that you're going to share with us. So without further ado, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you for the invitation for giving this talk. Hopefully I can provide a little bit of background on from the experience that I've had with micro-oxygenation over the past, I think, basically going on about 26, 27 years now between Gallo and Stavin. So without further ado, I'll just get into it. So what I want to try to do, if I can get this out of the way. Okay, people can see me, but I can't see you, so that's fine. So what I want to try to do is give you some practical tools to use micro-oxygenation, and hopefully it'll actually help you in the production of your wines. So, okay. I can do everything. There we go. Couldn't get it to advance. So the outline of this is we'll go through the actual wine production process and kind of point out the places where what I'll talk about is both macro and micro-oxygenation. I'll try to give you some definitions for those and why I think it's important to distinguish them, and actually give a fairly good view of macro-oxygenation, because I think it takes the place in a much better way than trying to use micro-oxygenation during the fermentation process. After fermentation is done, then the employment of micro-oxygenation is pretty applicable, depending on what you want to do. So what I want to try to do is provide some of the uses, misconceptions, limitations, and then timing, depending on what you're trying to do and the effects that you might get at particular times. And what a lot of people would like to do is monitor it, at least initially, until you get used to what it does and what it doesn't do. And then when's it done? A good question. And then there's actually still a lot of unknowns for how things proceed. So what I want to do first is go through the process itself. So obviously, I'll mostly talk about red fermentation here with a few little add-ons for whites, and I'll point out where those are going to be. But generally, most people destem, crush, try to adjust the must temperature, because temperature going into the fermenter is quite important. And you adjust your nutrients. I think that this is a great place to add both a combination of toasted and untoasted oak in the fermenter, as well, actually, as it goes being pumped to the fermenter. And generally, a lot of people will add about 50 parts SO2 at that point. Now, quite a few of the smaller and higher end wineries will do cold soaks. This has got some real interesting potential effects. I don't think it works well, depending on how well people actually are able to cool the must itself. But this is a point where it's possible to potentially play a little bit with the tannin content of the must itself, because it's the only point in the fermentation where you've got polyphenol oxidase still active, unless you really added a lot of SO2 and killed it all at that point. But then we get into the fermentation itself, and this is depending on the type of fermenter, punch down, pump over, a rotary fermenter, or pulse air or a combination of pulse air and, say, pump over. This is where you want to mix everything up. And this is where macro aeration comes into play, and controlling that cap temperature, because this is where you're going to get your extraction and hopefully best color. So after the fermentation proceeds, some people will do extended maceration, depending again on the size of the winery, how much time you have for the use of that tank, because many people need to roll that tank and get another fermentation going. But once you press it off, this is where you add oak and settle, rack, malolactic fermentation can proceed at this point. Micro-oxygenation, in my estimation, is best done after malolactic fermentation, although we have, to great effect, encouraged malolactic fermentation by giving it a little bit of boost before ML takes off. I'll speak to that a little bit more later. So definitions: micro-oxygenation generally is below about 100 mils per liter per month, or 3 mils per liter per month, or milligrams. The best definition really for micro-oxygenation is the amount of oxygen that you add to a wine that it really doesn't increase the dissolved oxygen content. And this is kind of tough to measure. Some of the new DO meters can measure down to 1 to 10 parts per billion, and you can actually watch this as you're adding oxygen kind of move around in sort of a sine wave as you're micro-oxygenating. But so macro-oxygenation is anything above that rate that does give you an increase in DO, at least a transient increase in DO. So why not micro-oxygenate during the fermentation? Biggest thing, although there are a couple devices that they just generally can't provide enough oxygen, pure oxygen, in the volume to be really useful. But some can. But what I've seen now over the last 20 years is the folks that have used pure oxygen, and some do it well, but I've seen a couple times where when they add the oxygen, they added a little bit too much, they shut it off, and then the yeast do this rebound effect, and all of a sudden really start cranking out the H2S. And then you have a problem, and you're trying to chase your tail, trying to get control of that. And I have not found that this is an issue when you're just using air. So, and one of the other problems is a lot of people won't do it often enough to really be effective. And as well, most people are sparging under the cap because that's where it's easy to put the sparger itself, and it's not really effective versus where you're aerating the must that you're pumping from the bottom of the fermenter up and then air essentially sprinkling over the top. Now, saying all that for reds, it still may be beneficial for whites. I saw some very nice results with small amount of micro-oxygenation on some Verdejo in Spain, where we really kept nice control of the sulfides and it really came out with a nice fruity ferment. So whites has potential. So why macro aerate? And this is using air. It's only 20% not oxygen, so you're not overdoing it in one sparging effort. It's really good for the yeast health, just kind of mixing around. And probably the most important thing is that 80% nitrogen that's in that mix helps eliminate, just bounce out the carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the must itself. And with that carbon dioxide, as it goes off, that can really help later on with green characters, things of this nature, which basically pyrazines, they aren't very oxidizable, but they are very volatile. And we believe that some of this is carried off with that evolving carbon dioxide as you're adding or sparging that fermentation with air. It does help control redox. So you really help to minimize the H2S and other sulfides. Just a little bit goes a long ways. And it appears that just if you're just doing a pump over fermentation, your normal pump over schedule is enough to provide this action and keep the yeast under control from producing those sulfides. It does seem to help produce a pool of oxidized compounds that are capable of accepting electrons, again, which those electrons have to go somewhere. Generally, the yeast will pump them into sulfur if they don't have some other compound to have them be accepted to. So one of the other important things, especially early in the fermentation, is that you're providing a bunch of oxidized compounds which may help increase and then save the concentration of acetaldehyde which is being produced at that point. And this is important in the initiation of color stabilization when you're trying to cross-link tannins and anthocyanins. So that's a really important concept to try to get a handle on, and it does help to minimize vegetative characters resulting in the wine's flavor and aroma. I'll talk to that a little bit more, the interaction of sulfides and some of the other green characters. So again, a little bit in more detail, basically just air is important for the production of sterols and unsaturated fatty acids, basically making more healthy cells and hopefully helping your yeast finish that fermentation in an expeditious manner. And again, there seems to be this interaction between oxygen, production of acetaldehyde by both the yeast, and oxidation of ethanol later on in the fermentation, and the sparing of acetaldehyde by other compounds such as furfural and propanal. A lot of the furfural and other aldehydes can come from the toasted oak and some other types of interactions with the raw oak. So that's why oak is, I feel, quite important in a red fermentation. It doesn't have to be so much that you're affecting the flavor. What you're trying to do here is build body and hopefully start that stabilization of color. There is definitely an interaction between oxygen and nitrogen supplementation in the fermentation. The type of nitrogen that you supplement with is affected by, it appears, the redox conditions in that fermenter. A lot of the stuff that Paul Henschke did at AWRI seems to indicate that this is really an important item to try to keep control of. So, and then later on in the fermentation, using air, oxygen helps result in lower release activity. So once you're finished with the fermentation and the yeast settle out, you don't have the tendency as much to start producing a lot of sulfides after the fermentation from the activity in that lees bed. So why not pure oxygen? Well, in the fermentation itself, there's really no need for precise additions. You're just trying to bang out that CO2, which is the third one. It's cheap. It's easy to do because you can I'll talk about some of the different devices that you can add that air in there, but it really does help evolve off the CO2, which I think is really important. Just a regular tub and screen does not appear to be enough of an aid to get rid of that CO2 and get air into that fermenting must, because if you've ever seen that tub, you can almost see the CO2 rolling off the top. So the amount of oxygen that's getting in there really isn't so good. So you either have to have an active Sparger or a venturi, which I'll show you a couple different examples in a bit. So, and probably one of the most important things, I've not seen anybody get in trouble unless they had bad quality grapes coming in that had rot of some sort, and they start to have issues with VA production. So a real important point there. I have seen where they've used pure oxygen, they don't quite have it under control, and you can potentially produce disulfides, which then, again, you chase your tail later on in the production of your wine. So, and it seems that air may not be as beneficial to a lot of these advantageous microbes, Brettanomyces, Acetobacter, that we'd rather not encourage during the fermentation, because I have seen Brett actually produced and 4-ethylphenol produced in the fermenter, and that was in Australia. So when's the best time in the fermentation to macro aerate? Early is, I really like it, but there is, issues logistically with it. But it is the best point to try to encourage yeast growth. So increase that population, enhance the production of acetaldehyde, which again, is a active component in cross-linking and hopefully initiating that stabilization of the cross-linking for color stabilization. And as I said earlier, polyphenol oxidase may be active if you have low SO2 conditions, and because you're adding oxygen there, and there's a lot of phenolics, but not very much oxygen in a crushed tank of must. You may be able to modify some of the tannins in there, and some of them may precipitate out during the course of the fermentation because of that initial activity of polyphenol oxidase. The cons, again, it's possible, again, depending on SO2 conditions, to grow undesirable microbes. There's a potential problem with foaming. I ran into that one when we did a venturi in Spain. We foamed over a tank. We learned the importance of having a valve early when you initiate pump over with a venturi. And probably the most important thing, you really need to understand the conditions of your grapes coming in. If you have botrytis and you have lactase that's active, you can really brown your wine and lose the color. All that color that you're trying to get, you're going to lose because you're adding that oxygen. Lactase, just eats up the color at that point. And again, certain types of rots, sour rot and such, can increase volatile acidity. So the best point, so again, early, I like it, but you have to be aware of the conditions of things. The middle, the pros, really helps eliminate carbon dioxide, and with that, a lot of the volatile materials or volatile, undesirable aromas that you may not like pyrazines. Late, really helps to maintain the control of sulfides, eliminating, again, more CO2. And if we get that CO2 concentration down, it helps initiate malolactic fermentation. Jean-Marie Serolaz did a nice study which showed that too high of dissolved CO2 concentration is inhibitory towards malolactic fermentation getting going. And that CO2 may help eliminate the green. The cons of it, though, say if you're doing a Pinot Noir, you don't want to be aggressive with that aeration late in the fermentation because you may lose some of the aroma compounds you want to keep. And again, it always comes down to what's the condition of your wine. Have you had problems with bread or acetobacter? You really want to understand what the conditions of those grapes and that wine are when you're doing aeration, and then later on with micro-oxygenation. So throughout the fermentation, we can really control the activity of the yeast lees, so minimizing potential for sulfide evolution as you kind of stir them up. Say if you're going to do a tank stirring or barrel fermentations where you mix that up, if they sat there for too long, they can produce sulfides. The more you mix them, the more you give them air, the less reactive they are for the production of sulfides. And again, helping to minimize veggie character. So where do you put it? Most people, but not everybody's doing a pump over. Tub and screen, as I said, just isn't good enough. It's great if you're trying to get rid of seeds and other materials, but it just doesn't work to get the air in. Gets the CO2 out and may help with the veggie characters, but the places that you really want to try to go are either right before the pump, right after with a venturi, or at the top with a venturi. The gotcha with the air in before, because I know people will put a valve in there, is that you can cavitate the pump, which probably isn't so great for the must itself as you're going through because you kind of hammer it. It's nice to put air in just after the pump because you have a little bit of head pressure to allow it to integrate and do its thing before it is pumped out and then spread over the top of the must itself. The nice thing about putting a venturi at the top is that you don't have the potential for something going wrong and then spewing must out the suction part where the air is supposed to be going in. So there's good things and bad things. So this is one of the first venturis that we tried to do. This was from Pascal, an idea from Pascal Chatanet. These were devices that Marcello Monticelli at Gallo had made up for 80-ton fermenters up at Gallo Sonoma. They were great, except we found out that these things burp, and we had to go up almost every time they started them up because the workers tended to put that hose back into the top of the fermenter because they did burp every so often and spew a little bit of must. But if you kept it in the top of the fermenter, you're just sucking in CO2, which doesn't help you. So that's one style. This is just showing it in the tank. And this is another venturi is actually engineered by Angelo Mazzei down in Bakersfield, California. And this is kind of a cool thing. They do a lot of fertigation, different things for wastewater treatment. But with this little check valve there, you could put it on just after the pump and suck it in. The air will suck in as the must is pumped through here. They don't tend to get clogged up. I mean, that is one issue with early introduction of aeration with one of these before the cap really starts to separate, because you can suck in a little bit too much of the skins and it can clog this. So this works quite well on a small fermenter, the 2 to 10, 15-ton fermenters down off the pump. But where this is a stainless steel version, more or less cellar worker proof. We had a lot of the plastic ones, which basically people aren't really nice to things during crush. You got a lot to do, moving things around, it's easy to break. So we got Angelo to make up a stainless steel one, and it's pretty bulletproof. So this just shows you actually a Pinot fermentation that was up in the Carneros area, and just shows it. And they did aeration all the way through the fermentation itself. But you notice here that we do have a valve that we can meter in the amount of air that was going to that must as it was being pumped over. And this was another version of the stainless steel one at Wente Winery in the Livermore Valley, where they always had a bit of an issue with veggie character in their wines. And as soon as I finally got Willie Joslin, who's now retired, to try one of these out, and with one fermentation, they bought 3 or 4 more, and all of those fermentations were able to be aerated, and it really brought out a lot more fruity character because you eliminated the sulfides, which accentuate the vegetative character. Now, this is an example of a dual setup on a fermenter in Bodegas Campos Real in El Provincio, and this was a tank that I managed to foam over before we actually put the valves in place. Now they've got good control over things, and it really works quite nice to get that air into the fermenter. So the whole reason for really pushing aeration, and this is one of the sparging setups that you can see right off the pump. You can sparge in air, and we did think about using oxygen, and we went to air just because it's easier. It's another way to get it in there depending on what you have available in your situation. This was a system that was put together for rotary fermentation, because rotaries were great for getting color and extraction, but they were also horrible at sulfide production because you just couldn't get enough air into them, and this was a way and means to do that. So why do you want to do this macro aeration? Well, when micro-oxygenation came about, they were really pushing micro-oxygenation just after fermentation, but before malolactic fermentation. And a lot of that was to get color and, open up the wine. But the problem with it, it was the perfect time because you have burned up almost all the SO2. It's a perfect time to really produce a lot of, or help the production of Brettanomyces in that must itself, or the finished fermentation. So I figured that if we put more air in and try to do all those things during the fermentation, you don't need to mess with micro-oxygenation pre-ML, and you can just settle, rack, and then once your malolactic is finished, you go in and you use micro-oxygenation as a maturation tool. And that's the emphasis that I will push here, because I think you take care of all the issues with pre-ML micro-oxygenation by macro-aerating during the fermentation. Hopefully you can understand that. So what do we now at this point in time use micro-oxygenation for? Probably the biggest thing and the biggest utilization is it really helps as a method to emulate barrel maturation. More air combined with oak. Basically we're going to utilize this tool to help turn a tank into a barrel. We all love barrels and they're great, but they're labor intensive. There's lots of issues with sanitation, and on and on and on, trying to keep good control of those barrels. The thing now is there's a lot better micro-oxygenation controllers. They're easier to control, more plentiful, and there's good service and a lot more knowledge out there. There's no need to be worried about what you're doing, because more than likely over the last 20 years, a lot of people have tried it. They love it, hate it, use it if they need to. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but you can find somebody that can give you some advice if you're looking to try to utilize this tool. So the most important thing when you're doing MOX, though, is really understanding what you're trying to do. You know, the generally accepted starting points that, you know, really aided in the incorporation of MOX into various wine programs for wineries. And you really need to understand what you're doing if you're trying to replace barrels. I really push not eliminating all your barrels, but try to use the best barrels you can, but mix that with tanks that you're moxing, because you're throwing a lot more eggs into one basket with a 6,000 gallon tank versus 100 barrels. So there's a flavor profile, you know, and mixing and matching for trying to generate a certain wine program. You know, you're trying to be consistent with the flavors and taste for that wines. So the misuse, I mean, for many years up in Washington State, they were early adopters for micro-oxygenation, but they were sold as a, you know, it was kind of sold as a cure-all, and they tended to produce, the way they were utilizing it, it tended to produce more problems than it solved. So it kind of got shelved for many, many years, and now just in the last 5 years, we're really starting to see more MOX going back in there and utilized as a tool, especially trying to do essentially economic control, you know, because most wineries are really being limited with the number of barrels they can use, and you're trying to keep that flavor profile consistent. So how can you do that? You can do that with tanks and staves in a tank or various types of oak in a tank with that oxygen, and then you mix and match, and you know, you can really improve your bottom line economically. So the post-primary MOX massage, you know, for a lot of people was really difficult to do because you're just under the gun at that point. You know, you just didn't have time to watch it the way it really should be watched. And I think that's what got a lot of wineries in trouble. So if you do the macro aeration during fermentation to try to do a lot of those things and then use micro oxygenation for the maturation, it appears that we have a lot better control over many things. Problems arose with oxidation, microbial stability issues. There was just a generally misunderstood mode of action. We had a lot of people that, you know, the trials were too small. The grapes were in, you know, a lot of people that were trying to utilize this initially were using their worst grapes. Well, they either had botrytis, they had other issues, and as a result, a lot of those trials failed. There was no target end product, you know, for a lot of these trials, and there was a lot of wineries that tried an all or nothing approach, and they generally failed in that process. So you really need to understand, what are you going to do? Are you preparing wine for barreling? And this, I'll talk to that in a minute. Are you going to incorporate stainless tank made wine with barrel made wine and try to just improve your economics? Or are you trying to just solely eliminate barrels? Or are you trying to influence the wine character? You know, the tannin, color, herbaceous, sulfides, and, you know, a big one too is how fast can you mature it? You know, people worry about, well, will it last as long? But many people are trying to get that wine drinkable in a very short period of time. We've worked with people that want a bottle a month after they've pressed it off, and that's pretty tough to do. So if you're trying to prepare it for barreling, if there's issues, if you do a MOX treatment before barreling, you know, you can really minimize the sulfides. If there's not much in the way of solids in that wine, you can help decrease green flavors, aromas and flavors, but by doing that, you really minimize racking later on if you're trying to control those sulfides and green, and really helping to minimize labor costs. So that pre-treatment before you go to barrels may just save you time and labor costs for your barrel program. We've had a number of a number of wineries being very successful at doing this and really minimize the number of barrels or number of rackings that they use in their barrel program. So if you're going to incorporate a tank with barrels, maximize your best barrels. There's no need to buy barrels just because, well, they're the cheapest ones there and you need the volume. So you eliminate your older barrels, which may have sanitation issues. You're minimizing the labor and warehousing costs because you're only dealing with a set number of barrels, maybe only 25%, depending on how you want to mix and match this. And again, microbial. It's easy to clean a tank. It's hard to clean barrels. And you potentially, because you're using a smaller number of barrels, you gain better control, sanitation-wise, everything with those barrels. You get to it more often to sulfur or top off. So it's good. If you're eliminating barrels, you really need to understand your tanks and numbers to maintain control of flavors and aromas. Again, 6,000 gallon tank is 100 barrels. That's 100 degrees of freedom flavor-wise, because you can mix and match different coopers, different toast levels, different things like that. Whereas with one 6,000 gallon tank, you only got one type of oak if you're using oak in it, and that's it. So you're better off going to 6,000 gallon tanks if that's what you're doing versus one 6,000 gallon tank. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you're eliminating those barrels, you really need to understand your timing versus MOX, the dosing of oxygen in that wine to obtain the proper maturation for the timeline. And all of this, it all depends on your comfort level and how much confidence you have in it. So the timing, it's really important. And I kind of go back, this is going back a bit. If you want to eliminate veggie and green, hey, do it in a vineyard. That's the best place you can do it. If you're overcropping, that's not a good look. You're not going to have good color. You have potential for all sorts of things that are going on. Your best place after the vineyard is the fermentation. You can do some pre-ML dosing just to try to evolve off some of the green. And then post-ML, you can minimize green, but it's not as effective as doing it in the vineyard. Sulfides, for sure, in the fermentation is the best place to get and keep control of your sulfides. Pre-ML a little bit, but generally you're going to start ML anyways as it goes through, and you have no control over sulfides during malolactic fermentation. Once you get it finished, settled, solids gone, you can MOX it and eliminate those sulfides pretty easily, unless you made disulfides sometime earlier. Color, like I said, overcropping in a vineyard is kind of a bad thing for color. As well, long hang times isn't necessarily the best for color and for MOXing later on. But color, generally follows the same thing as veggie. And tannins just depends on the treatment you want to do. But I don't really see massive amounts of effect of micro-oxygenation in the maturation process affecting harsh tannins. If you eliminate the sulfides, that generally makes it more approachable, but tannins are tannins. So the green character, what are they? The C6 alcohols and aldehydes, pyrazines, sulfides, and all of these things interact, especially with beta-damascenone, to accentuate things. Sulfides are a strong accentuator of green, as well with oak. If you have a toasted oak and you add a little bit of sulfide under the threshold, it starts taking on a very charry character. So all these things come into play here, and trying to eliminate them, obviously is important. So if you're trying to eliminate them, early is the most effective. And we think what is going on is you're evolving off that CO2, which is taking with it some of those volatile pyrazines and aldehydes. So, and we kind of know this from anybody that's done flash détente. You can put it through the flash process, which is under vacuum. They evolve off the water that they suck out of it. And you smell that. You can smell the pyrazine, really strong bell pepper. So the stuff must be evolving off when you eliminate the CO2, because remember, you're only trying to minimize or decrease that concentration of pyrazines from, say, 20 to 5 ppb. It's a really small amount to have a big effect. So sulfides are basically that same thing. Turbidity plays a big role in controlling sulfides. Temperature and that rate, come into play. So 6 to 10 mils for just a week seems to do the job if you have nice clean wine. Tannins and color, later on during the MOX process, just doing 2 to 4 mils per liter per month appears to help quite nicely. So what do you want to monitor? You want to monitor dissolved oxygen. It's not necessary, but if you've got one of the cool Nomocork systems, it's quite cool to do. Generally, it's just a stopgap because the amount that you're dealing with, if you have a Clark type DO meter, you're only measuring easily down to a part per million, but you can see changes. Probably the best thing to look at is actually monitor and chart your free and total SO2s, and you can really see a change of what's going on, because as the total, you can see the free taking quite a drop if you're over oxygenating at that point. And if you do it too much, you'll actually see a drop in the total. Very interesting. So you always, when you start this, you always want to do volatile acidity analysis. If you're adding oak to that wine, you are going to get a bump in VA, but after that bump, it should stay very steady. If you're starting to see a rise in that, you probably have an issue with Acetobacter. So probably the best and easiest thing is just monitoring the taste and smell. And as I say there, take a half glass of wine, set it overnight, and compare it to a fresh sample the next day. If you detect acetaldehyde and not in the fresh sample, you're probably about right, with what you're doing. If you detect it in both, it's probably too much and you should reduce it. And that excess acetaldehyde is probably, but slowly, decreasing that free SO2. So they're kind of interactive there. But how do you know when it's done? It really depends on you and your program. After 3 months, you might sample that wine, evaluate it, and then shut off the MOX and then resample it in a week. If it's fresh and fruity initially, but then closed up, you may want to keep MOXing that to keep it nice and open before you're ready to bottle. If it stayed the same, then you're probably only need to do maintenance dosing until you're ready to go blending. So when's the process done? Generally, your marketing and sales guys are going to tell you. And when they're pushing hard, you're really trying to get things done. So it's like if you're doing a barrel program, you're trying to produce and mature that wine so you can utilize it if you're going to mix it in. So however you're doing your barrel program is a nice way to try to control your MOX. You don't have to keep going with the MOX. You can do maintenance dosing to just try to keep it open and going. So conditions to be aware of: turbidity. Anytime it's turbid, oxygen has little to no effect. If you let it settle and rack it, it'll respond really fast, really nicely to sulfides and really be able to eliminate those. So temperature, it's best to do it between 14 and 18. The higher the temperature, the faster your results, the faster the maturation. But as you start dropping below 14, you're really going to start increasing your DO and very slow reactions. And at some point, you'll probably be able to grow trout in your wine, which is probably not advantageous, because once it warms up enough, all of that oxygen that's dissolved in there will react and maybe not produce the results that you want. So temperature, turbidity, very important. And one mention I made earlier, overripe grapes really allow you very little wiggle room for MOX. You got a higher pH, you have a lot more stability problems, both chemically and microbial sanitation wise. You have more color stability issues. We've seen, they just want to react and precipitate. Raisening and uneven ripening limits that MOX for maturation and sulfides. We did a wine down south, a Syrah, that was overripe, and we tried to MOX it, and all we really seemed to do was make a nice jelly smelling wine. It really just didn't work the way you needed. So too ripe, too high a pH, too low an acid, probably not a good look. So you're really going to lose those fruity characters. So just as a real quick end, what type of MOX equipment's out there for you to use? This was something I did for Unified back in 2007. I just wanted to show you. It's now Vivalis. Their systems are quite nice. They've got very automated systems. Are really good. And you just contact the Vivalis people if you know them, if you're interested in it. The Parsec unit, these are the guys that I think they're probably maybe one of the best on the market, and they actually do tout doing macro-oxygenation during fermentation, even though I'm still not a proponent of that because of some of the potential for disulfide production at that point. The Westech unit, this is my box that I made many years ago based off of GC technology. It's sort of I always called it the learner box because it's a very hands-on manual box. It does the job, but if you're going up into bigger systems, then one of those other systems is good. And a new system that I am not familiar with is the wine grenade. They say it's nano oxygenation. It's all the same, but maybe a good system. It just depends on what you're doing. And then passive oxygenation, I don't have the slide for it. Flex tanks. Any plastic will allow permeation of oxygen, just like these guys are diffusing oxygen through a membrane. So will the flex tanks. And an easy way to do it, it's just not necessarily as easy to control, but for small volumes, quite nice. So I'll just end with that. The O2 mate, I forgot to throw in here. This is one where you can use it in a barrel or in a tank. I don't even know if they make it anymore. It was an Australian system. It's kind of cool. We used it in stainless barrels for trials, and it really does, again, permeation of oxygen through, but then you have CO2 and water vapor that go the other way. So this is it. I hope everybody understood what I'm trying to get across here, and if you have any questions, I welcome them at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of very valuable information there. At this point, we're open for Q&A, so if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them. Dr. McCord, in the meanwhile, I have a question, general question. I was intrigued about the pyrazine decrease with MicroOx. It makes sense. I'm wondering if you're aware of any peer-reviewed literature on that. It just so happens that I'm writing an article on pyrazines, and I was looking up methods to lower pyrazines, particularly in white. So I'm wondering if you're aware of anything that would help with that.
This is more, in a way, empirical and anecdotal, and off of, because I've seen quite a few of the flash détente systems out there, and it's amazing what they can pull out. Almond blossoms, cow manure. But the pyrazines were very intriguing to me, and I always wondered why, when we really did a nice job, one tank was macro aerated and they didn't have a venturi to use on another one, and it was so much less pyrazine in there, so much less bell pepper. So it's just my guess that it's evolving off with the CO2. I
Right.
don't have any.
This is really helpful. I mean, the thermovinification, it's hard to do that with whites. It's generally done with reds, and flash detant, yes, is very effective at getting
With
smelly
whites,
compounds out. Yeah. But
with
MicroOx, HyperOx for whites is something that's done, and I would be interested to see some research on that. So maybe that's a potential research project to consider in regards to methoxypyrazines in wines.
But you don't see too, I mean, the hyperoxygenation generally is Semillon, Chardonnay, which generally don't have that big of an issue with, pyrazines in green. And Sauvignon Blanc, I honestly don't know anybody that's tried hyperoxygenation with that.
Well, I know Semillon can have really high levels of pyrazines, particularly in cool climates. There's some literature on that, even higher than Sauvignon Blanc, which is surprising. So it might work for that with cool climates. Yeah. Thank you. So here we have some questions. How do flex tanks affect micro-oxygenation again, please?
Well, if there's Flex Tank USA and Flex Tank Australia. Basically, the plastic they're using, they have measured the flux. In other words, the transfer of oxygen from air through the plastic. And generally, my understanding is that in like a Flex Cube, which is I think 200, 300 gallons, that should give you approximately 1 to 2 mils per liter per month utilizing that tank. So it's at the low end of MOX. You're not going to be able to obviously give it a lot, but these tanks have improved a lot over the years. Early versions of these, while that plastic did its job, they didn't seal them well, so it was almost like it was open to the atmosphere, and they had a lot of oxidation issues at where the top of the tank was. I think they've solved most of those issues, but it's just a way that you can sort of passively, get some oxygen into the wine if you don't have access to barrels or one of these devices in a tank.
Thank you. Another question is, how does MicroOx help minimize harsh tannins? Is it possible to improve mouthfeel?
I don't see, honestly, I don't think it works that much on the tannins itself. I think by working with the green and the sulfides, that's what gives you better mouthfeel. I mean, because sulfides they have an effect both on the nose and your fruity components, because if you get rid of the sulfides, all of a sudden the fruit really starts to open up in that wine, but it also has an effect in your mouth. It's sometimes almost metallic, if there's high sulfides there. And so if you eliminate that, I think that sort of metallic thing adds to harshness or the perception that the tannins are bad, and that may help smooth out and make that mouthfeel, a little bit bigger and broader and more approachable. But direct use on the tannins, because I've done MOX on wines where they added tannins, and I thought it was too much, and they just didn't decrease it and make it approachable. So I think tannins, you're better off, you work in the vineyard and don't over extract it in the fermenter, maybe eliminating seeds, but MOX only has a limited effect, I believe, on the tannin and that harsh kind of character.
Thank you. Another question. You spoke a lot about using MicroOx to decrease maturity time and getting a wine to bottle faster. But what are the effects of MicroOx for long-term maturation and cellaring?
Well, with those people that are trying to get their wines to market earlier, they don't care, basically. You know, this is wine that they're trying to get on the market. It is not probably anything over $15 a bottle and probably much less. They're just trying to make it approachable so it doesn't have that real young wine character. Is that wine going to last a long time? Probably not, but it wasn't meant to. They're trying to get that in the bottle and off the market and sold and drunk, so they go back and get some more. So I've done MOX on some really super high-end wines, and I mean, we're obviously not pushing it like we are the wines that are going to be bottled in 3 months. Those wines, they're MOXed and maybe go to barrel, or we've done some in a tank over the period of 18 months, and then that's blended with a tank or a barrel program, and it's fine. Those wines seem to age just fine.
Thank you. Yep.
Hopefully that answers that.
High pH is a persistent issue in Texas. What pH do you generally cut off MicroOx as a tool?
Well, a lot of the wines in California were anywhere from the red wines from 3.6 to 4.0. And we've had guys down in the South Coast trying to MOX wines at 4.2, 4.3, and generally I won't help them because I think that's just too much. But you know, 3.8, 3.9, it seems to be all right. 4 is really pushing the envelope, and I think you're just asking for problems if you haven't done, you know, acidification. But again, a lot of guys out here they shovel in the tartaric acid, you know, into the fermenter. So they're trying to get that control that pH early. It's tough. It's tough where you have high pH areas.
Thank you. As a baseline, how much oxygen does a barrel incorporate in terms of milliliters per liter per month?
Generally, I think a new barrel is probably in the 2 to 3 mils per liter per month. An older barrel, probably less because you've been packing the pores with tannins and proteins, tartrates, and things like that. So probably more in the 1.5. But I've seen a number of different studies that generally the accepted range is 1 to 2 mils per liter per month.
Thank you. And our last question so far, are there any benefits to oxidizing grape juice before fermentation?
With some of the whites, like you were talking about, the hyperoxygenation, one of the places I've seen it be advantageous, and there's some really good guys up in Mendocino County. It's Fry Wines. They're an organic winery, and they're doing hyperoxygenation of their whites up front because they're trying to reduce the phenolic content because they can't add SO2 in the US. And so they're trying to make it so that that wine is going to be more stable over time by getting rid of some of those intermediary compounds that accentuate oxidation over time. With reds, like I said, I've seen some interesting effects in cold soak, you know, by adding oxygen or air there, because again, polyphenol oxidase is active at that point if you have not added too much SO2. So you may affect the tannin profile of that wine if, say, it's too tannic coming in. But you know, those are the areas where I've seen effects with hyperoxygenation early.
Thank you. These are all the questions we have. Thank you so much, Dr. McCord, for being here today with us. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to all the participants and everybody who is here today. I hope to see you all next time. And please, before you log out, take 1 minute to fill out the survey that will pop up as you leave the webinar. Thank you all again. Stay safe, stay healthy. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye now.